I never thought I would be the kind of man who would find himself in this position. My name is David, and up until recently I had what I believed was the perfect life. I was in my mid-30s, working as a marketing manager at a reputable firm, and married to a woman named Sarah whom I adored. We met in college, and I fell for her the moment I saw her. She was vibrant, full of life, and had an infectious laugh that could light up the darkest days. Our relationship blossomed over the years, and we eventually tied the knot, believing we were embarking on a lifelong journey together. For a long time, we seemed like the couple everyone else envied. We had a comfortable home, traveled together, and shared dreams of starting a family. However, beneath the surface of our seemingly idyllic life, things were beginning to unravel. I had noticed subtle changes in Sarah's behavior. She was often distracted. Her phone was always buzzing with messages she would quickly dismiss, and she became increasingly secretive about her whereabouts. I tried to dismiss my suspicions, attributing them to work stress or maybe the mundane grind of everyday life. But deep down, the nagging feeling that something was off continued to grow. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, a product of my own insecurities. After all, I trusted her implicitly, but that trust would soon be shattered in a way I could never have anticipated. The moment of discovery came on an ordinary Tuesday. I had just returned home from work, looking forward to a quiet evening with Sarah. I found her in the kitchen, her back turned to me as she prepared dinner. I greeted her, but she seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere. As I settled into the living room, I noticed her phone buzzing incessantly on the counter. A familiar name flashed across the screen: Mark, my boss. My heart raced. I had always known Mark as a charismatic leader, someone who could easily charm anyone in the room. He was the kind of guy who could make you feel important, but I never thought he would cross the line. I picked up her phone, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. The messages were there, plain as day. Flirtatious exchanges, hidden plans to meet, and declarations of affection. My world crumbled as the reality sunk. Sarah was having an affair with my boss. In that moment, time stood still. Anger surged through me like a wildfire, consuming every rational thought. Betrayal washed over me, leaving me feeling raw and exposed. I felt like a fool, a man who had placed his trust in someone who had ripped it apart without a second thought. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter we had shared, now tainted with the knowledge of her disloyalty. I confronted her that night. The air was thick with tension as I demanded the truth. Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic rise in her chest. She tried to deny it at first, but the weight of the evidence was undeniable. When the truth finally spilled from her lips, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I could hardly breathe as she spoke, recounting the details of her deception. Each word felt like a betrayal, a stab to my heart. As I stood there, the weight of her infidelity pressed down on me like a leaden blanket, suffocating the love I once felt. I had to act, not just for myself, but to reclaim my dignity. I was no longer the trusting husband. I was a man wronged, and I needed to take control of my life. The feelings of rage and humiliation swirled within me, igniting a fire I never knew I had. I had been wronged not just by Sarah, but by Mark, the man who had betrayed my trust in the workplace and in my personal life. The thought of revenge began to take shape in my mind, a dark but enticing path that promised to restore my sense of self-worth. It was time to turn the tables. In the days that followed the confrontation, I felt like a man possessed. I was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, humiliation, and betrayal twisted together into a single, sharp blade that cut through my every thought. Sarah's tearful apologies fell on deaf ears. I couldn't hear her remorse over the roaring tide of my own pain. I had to focus on what came next. Revenge was not just an option, it was a necessity. I started by gathering evidence. I had been an observant husband, and I knew how to play the game. I began by discreetly documenting Sarah's whereabouts. I followed her on a couple of occasions, careful to keep my distance. I watched her meet Mark for lunch at a quaint little cafe downtown, the same place we used to frequent when we were still in love. The sight of them together, laughing and whispering, made my blood boil. It was a scene that should have been mine, a moment stolen by the man I had trusted to lead my career. I made sure to take pictures, capturing the moments that would serve as my arsenal. I documented their exchanges, noting the times and places where their affair blossomed. Each snapshot felt like a small victory, a step closer to reclaiming my dignity. I knew I had to approach this with a clear head. I couldn't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I was no longer just a hurt husband. I was a man on a mission. The next step was to confront Mark. I had worked under him long enough to know how he operated. He was a master of manipulation, a man who thrived on power and control. I had seen him charm clients and colleagues alike, but I also knew his weaknesses. Every man has a chink in his armor, and I was determined to find it. I spent nights researching company policies and employee conduct guidelines. I wasn't just going to confront him about the affair, I was going to bring him down. I learned about a few infractions he had committed in the past: misusing company resources, inappropriate comments toward female employees. I began to compile a dossier that would expose him for what he truly was. Once I had gathered enough evidence, I set a plan in motion. I arranged a meeting with the HR department under the pretense of discussing my career progression. I carefully crafted my words, presenting myself as a concerned employee who had witnessed unethical behavior. I mentioned Mark's inappropriate comments and his misuse of company funds, all while keeping my demeanor calm and collected. The HR representative listened intently, taking notes as I spoke. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she processed the information I provided. I dropped the bombshell about Sarah's affair with Mark, framing it as a conflict of interest that jeopardized the integrity of the workplace. The look on her face was priceless, shock mixed with intrigue. I had their attention and I was going to use it. With each passing day, I could feel the walls closing in on Mark. I had become a ghost in my own life, haunting the corridors of the office while plotting his downfall. I watched as he continued to strut around with his usual bravado, unaware that his empire was crumbling. I took satisfaction in knowing that every smile he flashed was a facade, one that I was about to shatter. As I executed my plan, I felt a strange sense of empowerment washing over me. The bitterness that had once consumed me began to transform into something else, a fierce determination. I was no longer just a victim of betrayal. I was a man reclaiming his power. I began to see myself differently, as someone who could take control of his destiny, who could dismantle the very foundation of the life that had been built on lies. But even as I reveled in my newfound strength, I had to remind myself of the emotional toll it was taking. There were moments when I would catch a glimpse of Sarah's face, her eyes filled with regret, and I would feel a pang of sorrow. I had loved her once, and the memories of our life together still haunted me. Yet I knew that I could not allow myself to be swayed by nostalgia. This was about justice, my justice. With each step I took toward revenge, I felt the old David slipping away, replaced by someone who was stronger, more resolute. I was ready to face Mark, ready to confront the man who had betrayed me in the most unforgivable way. The final act was drawing near, and I could almost taste the sweet satisfaction of revenge. The day of reckoning arrived, and I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. I had arranged to meet with the HR department to present my findings regarding Mark. It was a calculated risk, but I was confident in the evidence I had gathered. I wore a crisp suit, hoping to project an air of professionalism, masking the storm brewing within me. As I stepped into the elevator, I glanced at my reflection in the polished metal. I looked like a man on a mission, but inside, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. When I entered the HR office, I was greeted by the same representative I had spoken to earlier, along with her supervisor. They invited me to sit, and I could see the curiosity in their eyes. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves as I prepared to lay out my case. I had rehearsed this moment countless times, but now that I was here, the gravity of the situation hit me like a freight train. I began by outlining my concerns about Mark's behavior, highlighting specific incidents that had raised red flags. I presented the evidence: photos, emails, and testimonies from colleagues who had witnessed his misconduct. It felt empowering to see the pieces of my plan coming together, but I knew I had to tread carefully. The stakes were high, and I was acutely aware of the potential backlash. As I spoke, I could see the expressions on their faces shift from curiosity to concern. I detailed the affair with Sarah, framing it as not only a betrayal of our marriage but also a breach of professional ethics. I emphasized how it created a hostile work environment, one that could lead to legal ramifications for the company if not addressed. The atmosphere grew tense, and I could sense that I had their full attention. After I finished my presentation, there was a moment of silence. The HR supervisor leaned back in her chair, contemplating the weight of my accusations. "David, this is serious," she finally said, her tone measured. "We will conduct a thorough investigation into your claims. Thank you for bringing this to our attention." I felt a rush of triumph wash over me. I had done it. I had taken the first step toward dismantling the life that had betrayed me. As I left the HR office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. This was just the beginning, but I was now in control of my narrative. Over the next few weeks, I watched as the investigation unfolded. Mark's demeanor shifted. The confident swagger he once exuded began to fade. I could see the worry lines etching deeper into his forehead, the way he would glance over his shoulder as if expecting me to confront him at any moment. It was a sight that brought me a sense of satisfaction I hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to reach out, desperate for my forgiveness. I ignored her calls and texts, each notification a reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our marriage. I was no longer the man who would forgive and forget. I was a man seeking justice. I had become a stranger to her, and the distance only solidified my resolve. As the investigation progressed, I learned from colleagues that whispers were circulating about Mark's potential termination. The power dynamics within the office were shifting, and I reveled in the knowledge that I was the catalyst for it all. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I held the keys to his downfall. I had transformed from the betrayed husband into a figure of authority, albeit in a different capacity. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, I received an unexpected email from the HR department. They had scheduled a meeting with me to discuss the findings of their investigation. My heart raced as I read the message, anticipation and dread mingling within me. I knew this could be the moment I had been waiting for, Mark's reckoning. When I walked into the HR office for the final meeting, my palms were clammy, but I steeled myself for whatever news awaited. The HR representative and her supervisor were seated at the table, and I could see the seriousness etched on their faces. "David," the supervisor began, "after a thorough investigation, we have concluded that there is sufficient evidence to take disciplinary action against Mark. His conduct has violated company policy, and we will be terminating his employment effective immediately." A wave of triumph washed over me, but I kept my expression neutral. I nodded, trying to maintain my composure. "Thank you for taking this seriously," I replied, my voice steady. Inside, however, I was elated. I had achieved what I set out to do. Mark was no longer a threat to my life, my career, or my marriage. As I left the HR office, I felt lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had taken control, not just of the situation but of my life. But even as I celebrated my victory, I knew I had to face the next challenge, Sarah. The time had come to confront her once and for all, to let her know that I was no longer the man she had betrayed. I had reclaimed my power, and now it was time to sever the ties that bound us. The days following Mark's termination were a blur of mixed emotions. I felt a sense of accomplishment, but I also knew that the real work was far from over. My focus shifted to Sarah, and I could no longer postpone the inevitable confrontation. It was time to end the charade and make it clear that I was no longer the man she had once known. I decided to meet her at a small cafe where we had shared many happy moments. It felt surreal, walking into a place that had once been filled with laughter and love, now tainted by betrayal. I took a deep breath as I spotted her sitting at a corner table, her fingers nervously fidgeting with her coffee cup. She looked up as I approached, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and fear. "David," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm so glad you came." I sat down across from her, maintaining a cool demeanor. "We need to talk," I replied, my tone firm. I could see the tension in her shoulders as I spoke, the weight of what was to come hanging in the air between us. "I know I've messed up," she began, her voice cracking. "I never meant to hurt you. It was a mistake, a moment of weakness." I held up my hand to stop her. "Save it, I've heard enough excuses." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. The anger that had simmered beneath the surface for weeks now bubbled over. "You betrayed me, Sarah. You didn't just ruin our marriage, you betrayed my trust in the worst way possible." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy, but I quickly pushed it away. This was not the time for compassion. I had spent too long being the forgiving husband, and now I needed to reclaim my dignity. "I've spent the last few weeks putting the pieces together," I continued, my voice steady. "I know everything about your affair with Mark. I know how long it's been going on and how you lied to my face while I trusted you." Her expression shifted from sorrow to defensiveness. "You don't understand. Mark was there for me when you were too busy with work. I felt alone, David. You didn't notice me slipping away. Don't put this on me," I shot back, my anger flaring again. "I was working hard to provide for us, to build a future. You could have talked to me instead of running to my boss. You chose betrayal over honesty." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the realization dawning on her. This was not the man she had once known. I had changed. I was no longer willing to accept her excuses or her empty apologies. "I want a divorce," I said, the words tasting bitter yet liberating. "I can't be with someone who has shattered my trust. I deserve better than this, and so do you." Her face fell and she shook her head in disbelief. "David, please don't say that. We can work through this. We can fix it." I leaned forward, locking my gaze with hers. "There's nothing to fix. You've made your choice and now I'm making mine. I'm moving on." The finality of my words hung in the air, and I could see the hope draining from her eyes. "I'll get a lawyer," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Good," I replied, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. I had taken control of the narrative, and it felt empowering. I stood up to leave, but paused for a moment, glancing back at her. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah, but it won't be with me." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The confrontation had been difficult, but it was necessary. I was no longer trapped in a loveless marriage. I was free to pursue the life I wanted, one that didn't include betrayal and deceit. In the days that followed, I focused on myself. I threw myself into work, channeling my energy into projects that had been neglected during my turbulent marriage. I rediscovered hobbies I had set aside and began to take better care of myself. I started hitting the gym regularly, feeling the endorphins flood my system with each workout. The more I focused on my own well-being, the more I realized how much I had lost sight of myself while trying to keep the peace in a failing marriage. It wasn't long before I began to notice the attention of other women. I had always been somewhat attractive, but now, with my newfound confidence and commitment to self-improvement, I felt like a different man altogether. I started going out with friends more often, engaging in conversations with women who were genuine and kind, not just looking for a momentary escape from their own lives. One evening, while out with friends at a local bar, I met someone who caught my eye. Her name was Lily, and she was vibrant, funny, and refreshingly honest. We hit it off immediately, sharing stories and laughter that felt like a breath of fresh air. I realized how much I had missed genuine connection, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. As I got to know Lily, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come since that fateful day of discovery. I had faced betrayal head-on and emerged stronger, ready to embrace a new chapter in my life. I was no longer defined by my past. I was a man who had reclaimed his power and was ready to build a future filled with promise. But before I could fully embrace this new relationship, I knew I had to finalize my divorce and close the chapter on my marriage with Sarah. I had taken the necessary steps, but the emotional closure was still pending. I was determined to move forward, not just for myself, but to honor the new beginning that awaited. The time had come for me to put the final pieces in place, and to sever the ties that had bound me to a life of betrayal. The divorce proceedings were a whirlwind of emotions, and as I navigated through the legalities, I found myself reflecting on the life I had shared with Sarah. It was a strange juxtaposition of grief and relief. I felt the weight of the memories we had built together, yet I was finally free from the shackles of betrayal that had suffocated me for so long. I hired a lawyer, and we began the process of separating our assets. I was determined to make this as smooth as possible, but I knew there would be difficulties ahead. Sarah had been my partner in life, and now we were reduced to negotiating over material possessions and financial settlements. It felt surreal, as if I were watching a movie about someone else's life. Throughout the process, I maintained my composure, but I could sense Sarah's desperation. She had once been so confident, so sure of herself, but now she seemed lost. She would often call me, pleading for another chance, promising to change, but I remained steadfast in my decision. I had learned that love could not be rebuilt on a foundation of deceit. One afternoon, as I reviewed documents with my lawyer, I received a text from Sarah. It was a simple message. "Can we talk? I need to see you." My heart raced at the thought of facing her again. I had been avoiding direct contact, preferring to keep things strictly business. But there was something in her message that tugged at my conscience. I agreed to meet her, knowing that I had to face the woman who had once been my world. We chose a neutral location, a small park near our old neighborhood. As I walked toward the bench where we agreed to meet, I felt a mix of apprehension and resolve. I had spent so long preparing for this moment, and now that it was here, I wasn't sure what to expect. When I saw her sitting there, her posture slumped and her eyes downcast, my heart softened just a little. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment the facade of anger and betrayal fell away. I could see the vulnerability in her expression, and it reminded me of the woman I had fallen in love with years ago. "David," she started, her voice shaking. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. "What do you want to talk about?" I wanted to apologize again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've hurt you and I can't take it back, but I want you to know that I'm sorry for everything. I've done a lot of thinking since you found out about Mark." I held up my hand, cutting her off. "Sarah, I appreciate your apology, but it's too late. You made your choice and I can't go back to that life. I'm moving forward." "I know," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. I thought I could fix things. I thought you would forgive me. I realize now how selfish I was." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment I felt a flicker of sympathy, but I quickly reminded myself of the pain she had caused me. "You betrayed my trust in the most profound way. I loved you and you shattered that love. I can't rebuild what's been broken." She nodded, her gaze falling to the ground. "I understand. I just wanted to see you one last time to say that I'm truly sorry." The silence between us stretched, and I could feel the weight of our shared history pressing down on me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I also knew that this was not the place for anger. This was about closure. "Sarah, I wish you well," I said finally, my voice steady. "I hope you find happiness, but it won't be with me. I need to focus on my own life now." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I hope you find it too, David. You deserve to be happy." As I stood to leave, I felt a strange sense of finality. This was the closure I had been seeking, and I was ready to move on. I walked away from that meeting feeling lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from my shoulders. The chapter with Sarah was finally closed, and I was free to embrace the future. In the weeks that followed, I poured myself into my work and my new relationship with Lily. She had become a breath of fresh air in my life, someone who understood my journey and supported my growth. We shared laughter and deep conversations, and I felt a connection that I hadn't experienced in years. I was ready to love again, but this time, I was approaching it with caution and a newfound sense of self-worth. As I settled into my new life, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. The pain of betrayal had transformed into a catalyst for change, pushing me to reclaim my identity and pursue a path that was true to myself. I had learned valuable lessons about love, trust, and the importance of standing up for oneself. But there was still one last step to take: finalizing the divorce. I knew I had to sign the papers and officially end the marriage. It felt like a formality, but I understood the significance of that moment. It was time to acknowledge the past and fully embrace the future. When the day arrived to sign the divorce papers, I felt a mix of emotions. I sat in my lawyer's office, the document resting on the desk in front of me. As I signed my name, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. This was more than just a legal separation. It was a declaration of my independence. I had faced betrayal, fought for my dignity, and emerged stronger than ever. I was ready to embrace my new life, filled with hope and possibilities. With the divorce finalized, I felt a sense of closure that allowed me to fully commit to Lily and the new chapter we were writing together. I had turned the page on a painful past, ready to embrace a future filled with love, trust, and newfound happiness. The days following the finalization of my divorce felt surreal, almost euphoric. I had spent so much time wrapped up in the chaos of betrayal and heartbreak that it was hard to believe I was finally free. As I walked out of my lawyer's office, the weight of my past lifted off my shoulders, replaced by a sense of liberation I hadn't felt in years. I was ready to embrace the next chapter of my life, one that I hoped would be filled with joy, laughter, and most importantly, honesty. Lily and I had developed a beautiful relationship, and I knew she was the kind of woman I had been searching for, someone who valued communication as much as I did. We spent our weekends exploring the city, trying new restaurants, and enjoying each other's company. I found myself laughing more than I had in a long time, and for the first time I felt like I was living, not just existing. One evening, as we sat on the rooftop of a trendy bar overlooking the city skyline, I turned to Lily and smiled. "You know, I never thought I would be here again, feeling this way," I admitted, my heart swelling with gratitude. "You've brought so much joy into my life." She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve happiness, David. You've been through so much, and it's inspiring to see how you've taken control of your life." Her words resonated deeply with me. I had spent so long feeling like a victim of circumstance, but now I was a man who had reclaimed his power. I had faced betrayal head-on, transformed my pain into strength, and emerged on the other side with a clearer understanding of what I wanted in life and love. As we continued to talk and laugh, I realized that I had finally let go of the bitterness that had once consumed me. I had learned that it was possible to forgive, not for the sake of the person who hurt me, but for my own peace of mind. The journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. I had grown in ways I never anticipated, and I was ready to embrace a future filled with love, trust, and authenticity. A few weeks later, as we strolled through a local park on a sunny afternoon, the warmth of the sun on our faces, I felt a surge of affection for Lily. I paused, turning to her with a serious expression. "Can I ask you something?" I said, my heart racing. "Of course," she replied, curiosity dancing in her eyes. "I know it's still early in our relationship, but I want to be honest about my feelings. I see a future with you, and I want to explore that together. I've been through a lot, and I don't take this lightly." Her face lit up with a radiant smile, and my heart soared. "David, I feel the same way. I want to build something meaningful with you. I know we both have pasts, but I believe we can create a beautiful future together." In that moment, I knew that I had made the right choice in moving forward. I had faced my demons, confronted the pain of betrayal, and emerged stronger, ready to embrace the love that was waiting for me. I had learned that life could be unpredictable, but it was also full of possibilities if I was willing to take risks. As we walked hand in hand, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had faced betrayal, but I had also rediscovered my strength and resilience. I was no longer defined by the hurt I had endured. I was a man reborn, ready to embrace a future filled with promise. In the weeks that followed, we continued to explore our relationship, deepening our connection and building a foundation of trust and respect. I found myself smiling more, laughing more, and enjoying life in ways I hadn't thought possible after my marriage ended. I realized that I had transformed my pain into a powerful lesson, a lesson about love, trust, and the importance of standing up for oneself. I had learned to prioritize my happiness and to seek out relationships that uplifted me instead of dragging me down. As I lay in bed one night, I turned to Lily, who was peacefully asleep beside me. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I had turned the page on a painful chapter of my life, and I was ready to embrace the new story that was unfolding. I knew that challenges would come, but I also knew I had the strength to face them head-on. The journey of healing and self-discovery had taught me that true empowerment came from within. I had learned to love myself again, to trust myself, and to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. And as I drifted off to sleep, I did so with a heart full of hope, ready to embrace whatever came next. Life had a way of surprising me, and I was ready to meet those surprises with open arms. I had faced betrayal, fought for my dignity, and emerged victorious. I was no longer just a husband who had been wronged. I was a man who had learned to rise from the ashes, ready to embrace the beauty of life and the promise of love. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive.